Hi there. This is Larry Cada. I'm the employment coordinator with Midwest Shelter for Homeless Veterans. I'm preparing this video as a short financial literacy presentation uh, centering around budgeting. Um, the, uh, the key element of budgeting is to balance income, all income, against expenses. Very, very simply put. And so we're going to be doing some exercises uh, to point that out and to facilitate that concept and understanding. Now, I have sent out to you two file packages of a financial literacy lesson. Uh, there is a supplemental file which contains two different types of activities. The first activity will be centered around use of this fake or phony money. And you can either cut these things out, or when we get to the activity, you can just cross them out per the instructions that will be given at that time. The second portion of that activity is a list of different types of expenses, which will later on we will enter them onto a sample budget sheet to determine if a fictional client by the name of Betty is doing an adequate job of budgeting. And we'll enter those activities. We'll do a couple of questions concerning that, and we'll see how she's doing. Now, the second portion of that file, the second file, is actually the lesson plan, which I'm going to start going through right now very simply. So again, the main emphasis is going to be trying to put forth an understanding of how to work with and how to manipulate that basic concept of balancing expenses against income. So the first activity, we are going to use those dollar bills, and so the fake money. And so what I am going to do, I'm going to ask just a series of questions to try and heighten our awareness of what it is. One of the main things about financial literacy is to know where we're at and to understand the concepts of money, of saving and of spending and things of that nature. So I'm going to ask a series of questions, and what I'd like you to do is to either put aside one of the dollars that you have clipped out, or if you haven't done that, simply X out the dollars that you have. And since this is a multi-use kind of an interactive presentation, later on we'll ask who still has some money left and how much, and that person will be the winner of this little game activity. So the first question is did you turn off your lights or your radio or your television or whatever electronic devices you had going on at the time when you either left the room or your home for an extended period of time? Don't mean if you're going to go out to the washroom and then come back in or anything like that. But if you're going to be gone for any length of time, did you turn off the lights or those electronic activities? If you did not, the answer was no to any of these questions, cross out that fake money or put it off to the side. Second question is, did you pay your rent on time this month? Same thing, put away or cross off. Did you keep your cash in a safe place? Do you know how much money you received from all sources this past month? Do you keep track of your receipts or your expenditures? Do you know how much money you spent this past month on groceries, snacks, meals away from the house? Did you save any money last month? Do you know what date your utility bills come due? Did you expect your expenses last month to be what they normally were? Did you avoid paying fees to use your money this past month? ATM fees, currency exchange fees, maybe below minimum balance, overdraft fees? Did you pay more than your minimum balance on your credit card last month? Carrying charges on carrying a balance forward can be expensive and can build up over the years, over the months and years. Getting back to that one about the overdraft fees, overdrafts can be very expensive. Banks, if you don't have overdraft protection, charge a fee for the initial overdraft and then a fee for every day late that you haven't brought your account into things. So those are just general concepts, general ideas about some of the things that we sometimes lose track of in terms of where our money goes. And we should have a concept of those things, and we should be prudent about all of those different issues. The next type of concept I want to talk about is lending leaks. And in your packet on page 6, you'll find a little kind of a table. And although I don't want to concentrate on this too much, um, because I don't want to get into the minutiae, but it's good to know and to see and have a concept of what different types of things are costing us in the long run over the course of the year. And I don't mean to say that we can't do any of these things at all, but it's just wise to have a concept of how much they are costing us. So on the sheet, if you looked at that page 6, uh, the there were two things that were identified: fast food and cigarettes, and they were just representative. Typically what we're going to do is we're going to try and identify what the daily cost is, the monthly cost, and the annual cost. Not to eliminate those entirely, but to be able to know in total what they were, and to think about maybe some of the things that we could have bought if they weren't. Obviously, they do bring some enjoyment, and not to say that we want to eliminate any of these enjoyments. So I want you to think about some of these things for a little bit and start listing some of the things. I'll throw out some ideas of things that we might not always think about, but could be sources of what's called spending leaks. Obviously, the coffee associated with with food, daily coffee might be one of the things. And again, not saying to cut it out, but let's get a concept of what that's daily costing us. How about lottery tickets? Do we buy lottery tickets? How much did we spend on lottery tickets? And did we know how much we won versus how much we spent to get those winnings? Uh, how about extra TV streaming services or things? Sometimes we have a full cable, package that includes, all the premium channels, Stars and Showtime and HBO, and then in addition, we'll have, Netflix, and we'll have, Amazon Prime, uh, and other services, and we might be having too many of those. But what are we spending on all of those different services when they add up over the course of a year? Okay. Do we have unused memberships? Do we pay $100 a month for a gym service that we rarely go to? Obviously, it's important to exercise, and if we're fully utilizing those services, that's fine and good. But if we're not, maybe we should take a look at that, at providing alternate ways to doing that. How about unused subscription services? Do we get magazines that we're paying for in the mail that we never read, that are available online or at libraries? What about unused subscription services? There may be other subscription services also that we're not using. Um, how about excessive alcohol usage? Do we know how much we're spending on alcohol? And I'm not saying to cut it out entirely or even cutting it out at all, but do we know how much we're spending on those types of items? Uh, how about extra unnecessary trips to the store where, when we do our shopping, we go in for one or two items only. And maybe even sometimes going to a convenience store rather than planning out, one or two or very few trips to a major grocery store or a discount grocery store where we can do all of our shopping at the same time. How about impulsive purchases? How much impulsive purchases do we do? Uh, Either buying something on a whim or purchasing vanity items or purchasing something that we think we're going to use and never do use it. The key words here are not to cut things out entirely, but the key word here is extra things, unused things, excessive things. Sometimes it can be quite revealing over the course of the year as to how much we spend on these things. So identifying spending leaks is an important concept, not to curtail the enjoyment we get from some things, but many times, excessive use or we don't need. We simply don't need, and we don't seem to add additional enjoyment to our lives. So now that we're talked about concepts of spending leaks and being aware of how we're spending money, we're going to get down into the actual basics of the budgeting itself. And so, why do we do budgets? Okay, so we want to do budgeting to ensure that our expenses don't exceed the amount of income and resources that are available to each of us. We want to do budgeting to take a look at to avoid unnecessary spending or unnecessary accumulation of debt. We want to do the budgeting to save more or to spend less or to make decisions about increasing our incomes. We're going to be looking at some of the minutiae, the small items here, and at the very end we'll talk about, maybe some of the more important and larger issues. I'm not really going to get into in any detail. This is just, to get us going with the original concepts. So the first one is identifying the difference between needs and wants. So take just a little bit of time and think about, what is our concept of needs? What do we need? What do you think you need? What are some of the concepts of wants? What are some of the things that you want but aren't necessarily needed or necessary? And then there's a mixture of which things are part necessary and part wants. And certainly, providing adequate entertainment and leisure, fit both of those categories. We do need leisure, we do need enjoyment, but sometimes they can be excessive. We have to balance those things. We have to take into account how much of our need is actually served by that particular enjoyment endeavor. The next concept is fixed expenses versus flexible expenses. So what are some of the fixed expenses? Those are expenses that we have to pay every month. They're very difficult to change or alter. Maybe a car payment, our lease payments on our apartments, or our mortgage payments, or certain basic food items. Those can be fixed expenses. Now, as flexible expenses, they can change easily. Food, for example, besides being necessary, can also be somewhat discretionary as to how much we eat, what types of items, things of that nature. Those things we do have a choice, and our spending on those items are flexible. And then the last thing is that in talking about that key concept of balancing expenses versus income, it's like a barbell with the weights on both sides. And some of the concepts associated with income, we've talked about certain expenses. Incomes can be associated with earnings, from work. It can be reception of public benefits. Can be either our receipt of child support payments, or that could have also been expenses that we had to pay, as one of the other things. And maybe one of the income levels is that we get income from investment sources from retirement. Maybe we're in retirement, we have Social Security, things of that nature. Those are basic concepts. So the next activity is going to actually use that other part of the supplemental, where we have identified certain expenses for our fictional person or fictional client, Betty, to find out how she stacks up with things. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and figure out monthly income from all sources. We're going to do estimating of expenses. We're going to list all expenses. We're going to set aside time to review that budget, and we're going to adjust things accordingly. So if you turn to page 9 in the handout, you have a sheet that's going to be used in this exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to take time and we're going to look at, again, those listings of different expenses, and we're going to put them into the categories on the budget sheet. And we're going to do that for expenses, and we're going to do it for income levels, total incomes that we're going to add up. So I'm going to take some time here. Let's do it. And then when we get finished, we'll take a look at it and we'll answer some basic questions. Okay, now that we've had time to look at it, first question is did Betty spend more than her income? That should be readily evident by looking at the totals. Did she overestimate or underestimate the cost of some of the expenses? Were some expenses listed that Betty would have forgotten to include in her own personal budget? What can Betty do to prepare for expenses that she pays occasionally, like auto insurance? Okay, that isn't paid on a monthly basis. And how can Betty budget effectively if she's not able to predict what her income will be from month to month? So that basic exercise was an introduction to paper budgeting, and can be useful for deciding whether or not we have to cut expenses or whether we have to increase income, which we'll talk about in a little while. So the next type of budgeting concept is an envelope budgeting. Envelope budgeting is where we take the main expense categories and we label a series of envelopes. And at the beginning of each month, we take what we have estimated to be our budget for that month and we physically put in the money to pay those things into those envelopes. We put those aside. Then as the need for the expenses come up, take the money out of the envelopes and we pay those bills. Okay, we pay those expenses. When we run out of money out of the envelope, we know that we've not budgeting properly, or that we're spending too much on that category of items. That's basically what's called an envelope budgeting approach. Uh, the package that you got, which I'm not going to cover now, uh, but you can read through it and you can see what the concept is called a reverse budgeting. And basically how it works is you complete a monthly budget, you estimate the amount of taxes, you determine how many hours you work each week, you divide your total income, and you can take a look at it and see if you want to use it. Okay, so we experienced a little bit of imbalance between our expenses and our income levels are. So the first thing we want to look at is, rather than maybe necessarily cut out things that we're used to doing, is maybe take a look at increasing our income. So I'm sure you guys have ideas as how you're going to increase your income. If you want to share those in this session, let's do it. Let's think about it a little bit. How are we going to increase our income? I'll throw out some ideas. Okay. First concept that comes to my mind is that we're all very good and worthwhile employees, so maybe we ask for a raise, ask for at least talk to our supervisors as to how we're doing and what it would, if not ready for an increase right at this point in time. What can we do? How can we better do our jobs so that an increase in salary would be deemed appropriate? Other types of ways to increase our items. Maybe we have some certain skills. Okay, maybe we could use those skills on a consulting basis or on a service basis. Maybe we can do shopping. If we're good shoppers, shop for somebody else for a fee. Walk dogs, babysit. If we have expertise in finance, maybe we could do a little bit of consulting. Uh, Maybe if we're good technically, we could consult about teaching people how to use some of the more advanced tools, technical tools that are available for improving life, whether it's teaching someone about how to use social media or any other type of device. Maybe we can sell unused items, old clothes, DVDs if anybody still uses them. Uh, Maybe we can have a garage sale or sell unused toys that our children no longer play with. Maybe we could have a part-time job, okay, if it's not too strenuous. Um, Maybe we could get paid for taking part in a research survey. If we could register with marketing research firms and create a profile, and whenever that marketing research company has a study that would utilize some of our profile skills, they could hire us. And some of those research studies pay quite well. Maybe we could rent out a garage, a basement, spare rooms that we're not using. We don't want to do anything dangerous, but say you have a spare room that you need to, that's unused that you'd like to get some income from. Maybe you consider, if you're in a college town or close to a college town, is renting that room out to a college student. That could be safer than renting out to a complete stranger. Maybe you could rent to someone that needs some sort of a temporary extra space. Um, Maybe we can recycle some old items. Sometimes metal scrap is worth money that certain scavengers buy by the pound. Um, Maybe not so much a way to get increased income, but to raise our available dollars available, if we change our deductions from an employer to deduct more, from our paychecks, we might get less at the time of a tax refund, but at least we would have that money to operate with during the year. So those are some concepts. I'm sure you have others about increasing income. Another concept then is on the other side of this balancing barbell is how do we cut costs? And I'm sure that everybody has lots of different ideas. We could, in food, we could shop differently. Okay, make sure we have lists when we go to the stores. We already touched on having more major shops and less short shops, or even the use of convenience stores. We could buy generic items where quality is not an issue versus buying premiums. Now, certainly there are certain premium brands that we've come to accept that higher quality for that we don't necessarily want to change our habits in that, but the things to consider if we get to the point where that's necessary. We could prepare meals at home, and some of us are really good cooks, and the meals that are prepared are of equal quality to what you might get at a restaurant. Um, we could carry snacks or our lunch with us when we go to work to save money on use of from the vending areas or from going out to lunch or having it brought in. When we shop, do we compare prices? Do we shop in season perhaps and freeze items for later use? And do we stock up on staples when we can? Now, I'm not advocating hoarding, which is some people have been subject to recently, but sometimes when available, when there's adequate supplies available, we could purchase in bulk at some places like Costco and save money that way. How about when it comes to utilities? Do we lower our temperatures, or in case of air conditioning, raise the temperature? Uh, do we have the ability to change at night versus change in day? Do we use transportation services that would save money, would save the use of the car when available? And do we take advantage of all sources of public sources of income that we might be qualified for, whether it's LIHEAP or SNAP or TANF benefits or things of that nature? How about when it comes to clothing? Do we swap clothing with other family members or other people? Do we recycle our clothing? Do we save children's clothing if we're planning on having additional members of the family to be used later on? Do we have maybe a clothing swap with friends where we share sweaters or things of that nature so that we all have different looks at different times? How about entertainment? Is there ways to save money on entertainment? Use of free services like library or community weekend movies that they have, park benefits, use of public park spaces, use of forest preserves, to get out and do outside activities, which not only can save us money, but can also provide a healthy lifestyle. Last thing I want to talk about is financial services, which I think is very, very important. Do we pay our bills on time to avoid late fees, or service charges? Do we plan ahead and keep track of spending to avoid overdraft fees, which we already mentioned, but can be very, very expensive? We want to pay attention to those fees. One of the largest things, too, that comes up is credit cards and carrying a balance forward, where the interest that's charged on the carry forward can be quite high. They can range anywhere from 3-4% on certain cards, up to I've seen cards that have interest rate charges of over 20%, and they're the usury laws don't cover some of those very, very high fees. So it's important to be concerned about that. Do we avoid use of short-term loans, payday loans, so to speak, uh, which can be one of the worst ways to raise income. So those are the things to think about in terms of either when we're having budgeting problems, is either increasing income, okay, which could be the best way that doesn't affect our spending habits, or at the same time cutting costs. We've talked about a lot of different cutting costs, and I'm sure you guys have your own concepts of what kind of costs you can. And right now might be a good time to share with others. So what have we been talking about? We've been talking about spending less, and as one of the concepts. And so on page 13, there's just some ideas of spending less. 10 ways are listed. Don't buy it, outright. Borrow it. Share it with somebody else. Substitute it. Use it use things wisely. Find the best buy. Maybe we could make it. There could be people at gift giving time that they include an item that has to be made, that has some personal meaning to it, rather than just something that's purchased. Might we consider renting something or hiring it? If we think that we want to start cycling as an exercise, bicycles can be expensive. Do we want to try and rent it first to see if we actually like it before we buy it? Maybe our infrequent use, we rent it all the time. Okay, maybe you can find it for free. Maybe you can shop online and find it, or buy it used. Maybe we can trade items with somebody. So there's lots of different ways also online that can give us suggestions as to how to spend money, how to save money, how to spend less, also how to make money, additional incomes, and sometimes how to track and do budgeting. Last, I just want to cover quickly some of the things in terms of estimating what our expenses are. I've included in that packet some items that are a spending log, just to get an idea of what we normally spend on things so that we can estimate in the future. Also included on page 15, as we talked about, maybe there's certain expenses that we lose track of that maybe come up once a month. So there's another tool that can be used, which is a monthly expense kind of a schedule, where we can record what our ongoing monthly expenses are going to be. And the last thing I want to talk about is that we also mentioned occasional expenses, which are really easy to lose track of. And so there's another tool sheet there that we can either use ourselves or help with clients to do it. And things like birthdays, planning ahead, and it lays out by month whose birthdays are when and what we might spend. Holidays, educational expenses as to when tuitions are due. Insurance payments, okay, setting aside money for travel, gifts, car maintenance. That's a big thing. Is to perform normal maintenance on our cars, because when you have unforeseen large auto expenses, they can tip our budgeting balance in the wrong way. So these are just initial concepts, and hopefully we will be doing additional lessons which we might find helpful and useful. Have a good day, and hopefully everybody got something out of this short video lesson. Thank you.